Hello, folks, and thanks for listening to the Defiance podcast. I've got a great guest with me today. I met him recently through a mutual friend and have enjoyed every conversation I've had with him. I'm joined today by Yigit Ihlamur. Is that correct, Yigit?
Ihlamur. Yeah, very difficult surname, but yeah.
So Yigit is the co-founder of Vela Ventures, a San Francisco-based investment firm where they specialize in seed to Series A investments in B2B startups. They have a very interesting angle to their investing. People are always asking me about earlier stage investors. And although I've had angel fund investors on before, I don't think I've interviewed anybody yet who does the Series A investments as well. And certainly nobody with as innovative of a model as Yigit and his partners have developed. So I'm really excited to dig into all of that. Yigit, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, John. Thank you for hosting me and for the kind words.
Great. So can you tell the listeners what Vela is?
Yeah, very briefly, what Vela is that Vela is an investment firm that invests in early stage companies, and it uses machine learning and data as a competitive advantage. And it also invests in companies that use machine learning and data as a competitive advantage. So we kind of eat our own dog food. So we develop software in-house, and we also invest in companies that are doing the same with that competitive advantage.
That's great. So when you talk about using machine learning, can you give some examples of advantages that you're able to gain through machine learning and artificial intelligence?
Yeah, like maybe the best way to explain it is that I should give a little bit of context, like how early stage investments work. So what an early stage investor does is that they are in the business of collecting market insights. So as a result of that, they go to the events, they invest a lot in their network. So they do a lot of coffee chats, right? Like there's a lot of like offline conversations that goes on. So as a result of that, the information that you get is limited, and your time also gets sucked into many meetings. So when we looked into how we can innovate in the early stage investment space, we thought about like how can we actually see all the companies in the world? How can we get the market insights from all the companies in the world and from the market? So that was the thought process for us. So when we thought about that and when we looked into the market trends, there's like a clear trend of proliferation of data. There's more data about private companies. There's more data about markets. So with that, data has increased exponentially, but also the technologies that digest that data improved a lot. So when you combine both of those, the timing and the technology, that enabled us to build this technology that helps us understand the insights in the market. So as a result of that, we spend less time in doing inefficient activities, more time in efficient activities, such as instead of talking with 10 companies in a coffee meeting, we see millions of companies through our algorithm. And our algorithm enables us to listen to the changes, understand what's changing. And as a result of that, not only the time efficiency, we also find companies that otherwise we wouldn't be able to find. So that's a big innovation and change compared to like the other investment companies in the market.
That's very interesting to me on a couple angles. Number one, every successful artificial intelligence company founder that I've had on here talks about augmented intelligence. It's not replacing the humans, it's making the humans smarter, which is exactly what it sounds like you're doing in this case. So that's interesting to me. It's also interesting because I had this conversation with an investment banker, and we were talking about how can you guys use technology better? And he felt like the traditional investment banking model over the next 15 to 20 years is going to come under a lot of pressure because you're asking these really smart kids coming out of top 10 and top 20 MBA programs to come in and work 80, 90 hours a week doing a lot of grunt work. And he felt like there has to be a way to comb through all of these documents and not but they're literally asking these young associates to go in there and just read documents and annotate them. And that's not why somebody goes through an MBA program to highlight documents, right? So that's
Exactly.
fascinating to me that you guys are solving it on this side. Do you know of any investment banks who are taking a similar approach to what you guys are doing?
Yeah, like we actually modeled it from algorithmic hedge funds. You know, early in 1990s, there has been a surge of algorithmic hedge funds, and now, you know, in the public markets, there's a lot of algorithmic companies. So that was a big innovation in the public markets. So we actually modeled it from algorithmic hedge funds. So it's all about, like, you know, finding new data sets, interpreting those data sets. So the business that we are in is about, you know, acquiring data sets and understanding and interpreting those data sets. So there are like great, you know, public companies out there that, you know, Renaissance Technologies is one of those examples that does that. But exactly how you described that's what we believe, that like now we can apply these same methodologies or similar methodologies like the public firms had, but for the private markets.
Yeah, that's great. That's fascinating. And maybe we'll have some time later to geek out a little bit on the tech behind that, because that is fascinating to me, the way that companies are actually driving value through machine learning.
Yeah.
But first, can you walk me through your history? Maybe start with your education and your background and kind of how you got to where you are.
Yeah. Maybe I can even go back on the history, because I've been lucky and fortunate to be, you know, born in a house of entrepreneurs. And my family has been an entrepreneurial family, and specifically technology-driven entrepreneurial family. So as a result of this, since I was a kid, you know, growing up, I've been around computers. I've been playing with computers. I've been, you know, hacking and doing all the crazy stuff since the early 1990s. So as a result of that, I've been growing in that ecosystem and seeing the impact of entrepreneurship since the beginning. And that really drives me as a person since the beginning, that innovation can actually bring positive value, both socially and economically. So that has been like the key driver, and basically like all my steps have been relevant to that. So I studied engineering, specifically industrial engineering, and I've been very focused on optimization. And then after that, I had my master's degree in computer science, again focused on optimization, specifically machine learning. And the path has been that, as you can hear from my accent, I'm not originally from the United States. I grew up in Turkey, an emerging market, and saw the impact of technology in that, you know, emerging market. So after that, I wanted to have an experience outside of Turkey. So that's why I went to the UK and had my master's degree there. And then after that, you know, I wanted to still, you know, learn and basically go for where the innovation is. So I joined Google, and I joined Google's Google Cloud, and now known as Google Cloud. At the time, it was Google Enterprise. So started working in Google in Ireland, in Dublin, and it was amazing. I met with great people there, and I thought that like I should be like in the headquarters in Google, because that's again where the innovation is. So, and there was another reason as well. I loved Ireland, but it was really rainy. I'm a Turkish guy. I love sunny weather. It's important for me. So both, you know, encouraged me to move to California, to Mountain View, to Google's office, and in total worked at Google for 5.5 to 6 years, and decided to quit Google to start something new.
And when you say you were with Google Cloud, were you still working mostly on machine learning and kind of in that whole TensorFlow Google machine learning space, or was it broader than that? Or
it was broader than that. I was on the application side of things, you know, the stuff that probably most listeners have touched or used, which are, you know, Gmail, Google Calendar, Google Drive. I did take roles as like technical operations, technical support. I started my career talking with very small businesses to very large enterprises and helping them solve their technical problems. And then I moved to growth strategy and growth marketing. So work with the sales and product team very closely. Then I work with product strategy and designing basically go-to-market strategies for Gmail, Google Calendar, Google Drive, the productivity suite of G Suite. And after that, I did product management, specifically focused on the reseller ecosystem and the ISV ecosystem that Google has, which is an API for the resellers to provision and manage customers. And the other product that I focused on was the marketplace, which enables business, startups and independent software vendors to list their companies in the marketplace and integrate G Suite. So those were the places that I worked on in Google.
It's interesting, just real quickly, because I know you've got more to cover there, but I think one thing to point out for a lot of listeners who may not have worked with Google, I think most of those who have will understand this, but you were very much working in a startup then, because from a go-to-market perspective, Google is very good at going to market with selling AdWords and really is much more of drives a lot more revenue from an advertising perspective than being an enterprise software reseller where you're really competing with the Microsofts and the IBMs and the Oracles and SAPs of the world. And so to me, I tell people one of the best ways to do a startup is if you can find a startup within a big company, and especially a big company that is one of the biggest success stories in startups in the history of the world, right?
This is a really, really unique insight, John. Like Google Cloud overall wasn't like an A plan for Google or a B plan for Google. So it was a real startup like within Google. And when I joined, it was about like 4 to 5 years old, and there was like a product market fit, but we were still experimenting which channels to grow, and there was a big giant, Microsoft, that we had to fight and we had to compete, which was crazy to win against Microsoft in that market. And seeing the strategies and how they worked out has been a fantastic experience, working with amazing people doing those. And that was like the main driver, and that's exactly the conversations that I have with people who are just starting out their career. My first advice is that, hey, if you can work at a company like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and in a emerging business unit, that's just amazing. I was always thinking like, wow, I'm actually learning a lot and getting paid. This is really cool.
Well, and with those companies, you're not worried about them raising their Series B or the next round of funding.
Exactly, always well funded.
Oh, that's excellent. So I interrupted you on the Google front. What was next after Google on your journey?
Yeah, next step for me was that moved to California, like have been here, and the whole story as I talk through probably will resonate with your listeners as well. But I was always looking for innovation, wanted to do something that was impactful, and I felt like I learned great stuff in Google, met with amazing people, but it was time for me to do something on my own. So that was like the main objective for me to leave Google and start exploring what I really wanted to do. What do I want to do every morning when I wake up? What are the problems that I'm really excited about that have that I also have strengths and passion? So I did an exploration for 6 months. So I tried many different ideas. I wanted to understand what problems that drives me. What do I want to solve every morning, and where do I want to which problem area that makes me excited that I can actually work on for the rest of my life. So it was if you have like listeners that are familiar with AI and machine learning, my exploration function was very high. So I was exploring a lot and not exploiting, so not focused.
Yep.
So I had maybe 100 ideas, literally, like in a spreadsheet. I was looking and there was like a lot of dimensions, very methodic. And I found amazing ideas. Like they were like great markets, there would be like great businesses that would be created, and social impact would be also was very critical for me. So very high impact on social impact as well. So I tried different things, and then eventually, among those 100 ideas, which I can talk through, I executed like each one of them, for a month or two, to explore whether I actually wanted to build those businesses. And among those 100 ideas, VC was not in that. Like it was not in that list. Let's build a VC that is like really innovative. So it was not in that list, but the way that I actually did find it was through, keep an open mind and being explorative. So while I was working on like different startup ideas, I was also engaging with a group of, people that I know extremely well, that, they were thinking about doing investments. And I was also, of course, really interested in starting a business and getting funded as well. So with them, like I was looking for like investments to make, and while I was exploring, we all together like made angel small investments into the companies. And throughout that, like this was like a 6 months of exploration. And during that time, I realized that, again, it boiled down to innovation. Like I wanted to be in the center of innovation, and I wanted to work with amazing people that I can learn from every day. And then that was a realization for me that I wanted to be in the business of funding other businesses, other innovative businesses. And that's how I can learn every day. That's how I can learn from people that are really driven, really smart, really hardworking. So that was like the passion part, that I thought, wow, actually, I love this. Like I can do it, every day, and I can wake up every morning excited about it. But the other question was that, like, are we the right people to do this? Like, do I have the right strength? Can I do this? Can I do with the founding team that we have? So with that, like after a few months, and mostly I would say like a year or two of a real, focus on basically exploring the venture capital space, we realized that there was a lot of, inefficient processes, and there was a lot of gap in the market. And additionally, like it looks as like very high barrier to entry, which is high barrier to entry. But if you have a long-term view in venture capital, I think that's one of your key advantages. So when I thought about like all these things, it's my strengths and my passion really aligned with funding and helping innovative companies. And the strengths were long-term orientation, understanding the opportunities, being a strategic thinker, and of course like being a people person, right? Like it's not only the analysis, it's not only the engineering and doing the R&D, but it's also about like building relationships. So I thought that I had a great fit with that, and my partners as well. We were like we had a really good complementary skill set and what we brought to the table. So we doubled down on this, and after 6 months of exploration, I decided to go after and basically initiate Vela Partners with my partners.
So was there one single aha moment, or did this build over time and just at some point it just happened? 'Cause sometimes people there's a specific moment where it's like, okay, I'm doing this no matter what. Was there one of those for you, or?
Really insightful question. So after 6 months, I said like, yeah, this is good, and I wanna give this a try. So I was definitely not sure that this is like, wow, aha, like this, we are going to be very successful, kill this or something. So The aha moment for me was, again, being very open-minded and saying yes to many things in the first year. Not saying yes to the investments, but saying yes and being extremely flexible of meeting many VCs, angel investors, and startup founders. And for me, the aha moment was that when I met with, other venture investors and what they had been doing and how they had been thinking and why they were investing, I thought that, wow, like, there's a lot of inefficiencies here, and I'm not sure that thinking is right. I think I have a different perspective. I'm not sure whether that perspective is right, but I have this insight that they don't, and I think that insight will, help us be, a player in the market.
Have you
So
ever read the book or seen the movie Moneyball?
I just watched it this Friday again. So
Okay.
yeah,
There must be some inspiration in that for you, right?
very big inspiration. So Moneyball is the key inspiration that I thought, wow, everyone is just moving with their, intuition. Sure, like, as humans, when you see a lot of companies, you build an intuition. I respect that a lot. That's very true. But at the same time, there's a bunch of data sets that is out there that no one is using it. So, that was like the thesis that we had. That was like, if we were to use, data and actually complement it with human skills, we can build a very, interesting business and very promising business. And the second insight that I had was that VC is not a winner takes all market. So it's pretty much similar to university market, or restaurants market. So you can be the best, fish restaurant in San Francisco, and there could be another amazing fish restaurant in New York. So and when you look into the universities, Carnegie Mellon probably would be the best robotics and machine learning university in the United States, specifically in that. But maybe in the region of the Bay Area, Berkeley or Stanford could be like the most generalist and most well-known university. So when you think about that, like I thought that, like, if we were to be really, really focused in an extremely high growth area, and if we apply this, data and machine learning driven approach, I think we have a very promising business. So that was like the aha moment for me after, like, talking with VCs and understanding the landscape of the market.
Great. And I want to come back to Vela now that we've gotten to that part of the story, but I did see on LinkedIn that you were working at NetSys Software, or observing, I think, as you called it, on LinkedIn. Can you talk a little bit about that experience? I'm guessing that that's related to what you talked about coming up through an entrepreneurial background of family members. Is that,
Yes.
Can you speak to that?
Very true. So as I talked before, like as I was giving the background, I grew up in a household of technology entrepreneur. So my father was a technology entrepreneur in Turkey. He started his business in early 1990s, which was an ERP software company. He started as, like, starting with accounting and then expanding it to, other verticals, to CRM, HR, ERP, and all, aspects of, like, a company basically. So with that growth, like, of, since I was born, I was inside the company and understanding, how, my father and his company were thinking. So as a result of that, I was exposed to many different, executive decisions in the company, and saw how a technology company in an emerging market in 1990s till, early 2010s, how it was run and how it was managed and how it actually created value in the ecosystem. So this was deeply inspiring for me. My father was working, have been and still working really hard, bringing his desktop computer to home, at midnight so that he can code. So this was, when I think about it, I'm like, wow, I really need to work hard. I learned working hard from my father and from my mom. So that was like the story behind that. And that's how like I just got into the computer since I was a kid.
That's
And
great.
that observer role is relevant to that, doing internships, doing engineering work, like since I was I was a kid, so yeah.
And I think that's really important to see that. I think most people, especially in America, in North America, we tend to romanticize startups, and we brush over how hard the work is, and we brush over the stories of working at midnight while your kids feel not neglected, not that your father's neglecting you, but it's going through your mind when you're working this hard and you've got your children around. And I think it's really important to see both sides, not just the success, but the hard work. And I mean, I tell people there's nothing you will ever do in the business world that's as hard as starting your own business, unless you just make it a lifestyle business, and then maybe, but you're probably not going to see the success either. So I could see how that would be really important to your growth. So coming back to Vela, and you hit on this a little bit, you talked about some of the process and what you want to automate, but can you just explain how VC investments, especially in the Bay Area, work? Because I think they might work a little bit differently in some areas where smaller markets like Charlotte or Raleigh over here. But how would you say, what would be your 101 primer for how VC investments tend to get done in the Bay Area?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, when I think about the Bay Area, it is kind of like how, Paris for fashion is, or, how media and New York and London with finance and New York associated with. So it is, I think, very similar, it's a similar sense that I have. So there's a lot of investors and there's a lot of startups. And it is really good for startups, and it's really good for, investors as well. But there's also a great ecosystem of companies around that actually acquires smaller startups, and people actually in those companies go out and start new companies.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an amazing set of universities that actually train great talent. And then this is kind of like a crazy cycle of attracting talent and money, talent and resources. So there's like that
Snowball.
network effect. Exactly. Some of all, there's that like, attracting the talent, attracting people that want to do big things, want to come here. That's the truth. So that's what I observe. That doesn't necessarily mean that like, companies in other places outside of the valley are not good. Actually, they're amazing. And we don't only invest in the Bay Area, we invest in anywhere in the United States and anywhere in the world. We believe that talent can be in anywhere. But like the Bay Area and how other areas like compare is because of this talent magnet. Like it just brings people and it just brings resources. The difference between like a different, a market is smaller than the Bay Area from a startup ecosystem standpoint. The difference is that just because there's a lot of investors, startup founders also have a lot of options. So that gives them the negotiating power to actually pick the right investor and shop around and work with the right, value-add investor, not a generalist one. So, when I gave the analogy of the university and restaurant businesses, like if you're a AI startup, then you want to work with the AI fund, which, in that case, us. If you're a blockchain startup, no, like we are not a good fit for that. Or, if you are doing only fintech, like, I don't know, maybe we are not a good fit. So there's that like very good ecosystem where you can find amazing investors that really understand the value, and you can actually find right people and right partnerships here in the Bay Area. In the other ecosystems, I think investors have a stronger position compared to the startup founders. But at the same time, investors don't also have enough options to invest only in that market. So there's a limited number of companies, not like many. So as a result of that, investors also have to think about like, investing in markets outside of their local market eventually. So that's kind of like the overall nuances. But like when I explain the way that like how entrepreneurs raise capital here, and give some insights, is that typically you got to think about it as like a sales funnel, and it is exactly the same. You got to have a very large number of potential candidates on the top of the funnel, and then you got to qualify them as fast as possible. So the advice that I would give to the listeners who are thinking about fundraising: find minimum 50 potential investors to your company. And with that minimum 50, I can assure you that like half of them, when you send the deck, they will say, oh, it's not a good fit. Oh, I invested in this. So 50% will be gone very quickly.
And thank them for not wasting your time, the ones that respond right away and say no.
Exactly. And there will be some that will not respond. So as a result of that, like having that number is critical. I think there's a lot of VCs that are open for receiving an outbound email that is like really well written. I definitely respond to any email that is well thought out, that is like personalized to me. I never have a moment where I don't respond. And I think there's a lot of VCs that actually respond to outbound emails as well. So if you don't have the network, that's fine. Just do the work and like reach out to the right investors that with a personalized email. If you have the network, getting an introduction from someone that the VC or the angel investor knows is like a important signal. It's just a signal. But like it gives you a long way to basically help the VC to prioritize among many companies that they see. So those are like the techniques that I would provide from a fundraising standpoint, but I can get into details if you want to deep
No, that's
dive.
great. No, that was an awesome overview. Thank you for that. I know you mentioned, or I mentioned that you on your website, you talk about seed to Series A and kind of everything in between. What size of investments do you like to make? Do you have this is the size check I want to write with a certain amount of follow on, or is it really opportunistic to what the investment requires?
Yeah, typically the typical check size ranges between $500K up to $2 million for the first investment. Mm-hmm. And as you can imagine, seed is towards $500K. And Series A is towards like $2 million. And C, typically we would be like a co-lead type of a scenario. And Series A, we would be a co-investor where we work with other leads that can write like larger check sizes.
That was my next question. Okay, got it. So you lead the smaller ones, but you typically aren't leading on the bigger ones. Okay.
Exactly.
So I take it, or you've already mentioned that you have partners in your business, but I assume with the name Vela Partners that you did have partners. Can you speak to that dynamic? Do you complement one another? Do you have the same skill sets? What makes the partnership work?
Yeah, I'm actually very proud that we have an amazingly complementary partnership. So in total, we are 7 people. And more than half of the team are ex-Googlers. And all the team brings something very unique to the table. So a part of the partnership, for example, brings to the table of technology entrepreneurship. Starting a company, scaling it, and going through M&A process with that. Part of the partnership brings like a very strong market analysis and perspective and investment experience to the partnership. That's like really valuable. The other side of the partnership like brings engineering, product, and technology experience, like building and scaling products and companies like at large companies like Google. Part of the partnership brings like that software engineering skill that can actually, build the software and the tool that we have in-house, and as well as like talking with, entrepreneurs. So there's like a very complementary skill set that is brought to the table. And other than that, we also see our limited partners as our partners, because they are limited partners and they are partners. So we have a very, very strong ecosystem of investors in our fund. And there's a very specific persona of our investors. That persona is that they are either in technology or finance. They understand the value of intellectual property, and they are typically C-level executives, CEOs, or founders of banks or technology startups. So with them, it's just amazing to invest in the companies, because with that network, and not only they also add value with their expertise, but as well as with the introduction of new customers, partnerships. So that has also become an integral part of Vela Partners. So when you look into 7, it's actually a pretty extended team that is not shown behind, but amazing people are on board with us.
Yeah, the advisors, even if you don't have it organized as a formal advisory board, are almost as important as the partners in the business. When you need them at the right time, they are, for sure.
Exactly. I'm very thoughtful about not to, using everyone's time efficiently. So we have an amazing list of advisors.
That's great. So you mentioned, you do 500,000 to $2 million, and obviously if you're doing $2 million in a bigger round, it's probably a 10 or $20 million round, I'm guessing, if there's other LPs and a GP. But what are the biggest mistakes that you see companies that raise money in that range of investments that you're participating in? What are the biggest mistakes that you see those founders making during the money raising process?
Yes. So there are different mistakes that at the seed stage is different. I think Series A stage is different. But in the seed stage, if the entrepreneur is a first-time entrepreneur that don't have a sales skill, they typically don't put a pressure and timeline in closing the investment. So as a result of that, debt bleeds out, and the process goes, for 6 months, 7 months. I even saw a year, where the company is amazing,
but nobody's running it because they're raising money.
Or because entrepreneurs are sometimes they are they want to be accommodating, and as a result of being accommodating, some investors ask a lot of questions, and they want to get more data points, right? You can ask unlimited number of questions, and let me see this signal. Oh, let's talk 2 months later when you close that customer. Oh, okay. When your pipeline is at $10 million, let's have a conversation. So I think the way that I see as a key mistake is that whatever you have in your hand, just push it forward. If the market is receptive, close the funding round as soon as possible so that you can go back to the business, build it, and then go and raise again. And there's a lot of ways to do a very efficient fundraising, using simple agreement for future equity, safe, that investment instrument is making, I think, the lives of entrepreneurs much easier, and investors too. So I think that instrument should be used more often throughout the fundraising process. And company CEOs should think that they are running a public company. You're always fundraising. You never stop. You're always in the fundraising mode. You're always bringing resources.
Yeah, that sounds like great advice. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that some of the investments you've done, there were friends and family rounds where they had raised money prior to bringing on a more formal institutional investor like Vela. What mistakes have you seen, or do you think founders make when they take that friends and family money, especially if they think that they are eventually going to be a VC investable company?
Yeah. I think first of all, like I love seeing friends and family capital in, and what we call like in our assessment, a scorecard basically, we call it skin in the game. It means like the entrepreneur first went to her first degree network, put her own capital, convinced her friends and family to put more capital. So in the next, Christmas dinner, they have someone that is going to ask how it is going. So
They're
they
not
have
walking away from that investment lightly, huh?
so we like that signal, and we love when entrepreneurs do that. Because we are a third party, right? Like we haven't built any relationship before. So you should basically first go and do that and put your own capital, time, and, be very, deep skin in the game, basically. But the common mistake that we would see is that, the valuation and like when you took the capital needs to make sense. Like we understand like, the founder may want to give favorable terms because they were super early, which we appreciate that, as a outside and institutional investor, but that has to be also within limits of okay, you took the capital maybe 2 weeks ago and they have like a very reasonable valuation, and then there's a premium valuation for the institutional investor. That's a mistake. So there has to be a story of like why you reached that milestone and why that valuation increased for a new investor that comes into the table.
Does that mean you're a fan of convertible notes for that friend and family round? Does that address that problem in your mind?
Very fan. Very big fan of actually simple, safe, basically convertible note, or like the other instrument called safe. We are a big fan of that.
Great. Yeah. I've been a big fan of that too. I always like to word it as, let's let somebody smarter than us figure out valuation. We'll follow their lead.
So they can do, for example, like we see most of the time, family and friends sometimes invest with, uncapped valuation, but with a, discount, 10 to 20%, which is like reasonable. And then when we go and talk with the, CEO, then we can negotiate the valuation. And just because they believed in the CEO early on, that's amazing. They should definitely get a discount for that. They believe. So that's what, when we see that, we like that a lot.
You mentioned 10 to 20%. From a cap perspective, do you start to, once you see that cap, treat that as a proxy for an equity valuation that they were doing, or am I reading too much into that cap?
No, typically, like with the discount rate, in the simple agreement for future equity with SAFE, there are two main variables. One variable is the valuation cap, and the other variable is the discount rate. Sometimes you can use it both, and the agreement, you exercise one of those conditions based on the favorability of the term. Basically, if the valuation that the VC set is actually higher than what the valuation cap that you set with the entrepreneur together, then you exercise it lower valuation. If the VC sets a valuation lower than your cap, but you actually have the discount rate, then you exercise the discount rate, and then you get the discount for being early, basically.
Very interesting. What guidelines would you give to founders who have taken seed to Series A money in terms of their communication with investors?
Yeah, I think there's a few aspects to mainly communicate with the investors. So the first one is like, what type of a company that you are building? Is this like an independent company, or are you building a lifestyle business, which is fine, or what are your like long-term motivations for the company? And based on that, then you can actually go for the right investor audience. If you go for like a typical venture investor audience, venture cap VCs expect to see outsized returns for their investment. And one of our criteria is, 100x plus return from each investment that we make. So when you think about that, like the way that like you want to communicate to the VCs is that you got to talk about like the market opportunity very clearly. This is going to be a big company because the market is growing. There's a big shift. So that story needs to be like very crystal clear. And after the first meeting, the VC should feel like, wow, actually there's a 100x return potential here. So that's
Interesting.
like,
And just that's great. I actually was thinking more about their communication after they've gotten the check. And so,
yeah, okay.
so now they're executing, but that is great. I didn't even think to ask that question. Just make sure that who your investor is, what kind of return they're looking, and this is how I'm going to get you there. And this is how this thing scales. That makes a lot of sense from a communication perspective. I guess I mean more, I've gotten the check from you. Should I be communicating every quarter? Should I be calling you every week, every month? Should it be meetings, face to face? What are your, and I'm assuming it depends on a lot of different variables, but what are your high level guidelines that you would give to founders who have taken that money?
Yeah, I think being communicative is very important because, the investors is your extended team. Like, it's simple as that. So I would constantly communicate which risk are you retiring at this round of financing. Most likely it's a product market fit. So anything that you do in that financing round all your activities should focus on that. Everything is distraction, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So for your for like founders communication, for the CEO's communication, it's important to determine that KPI and clearly communicating what the goal is and where the company is going against that goal. So that is very important. How you do it is also dependent on how you run the company and how the relationship with the VC is. But like typically, how we do it is that we typically have monthly meetings that we discuss, and depending on the stage of the company, sometimes it's weekly, sometimes like it's over WhatsApp messages that like, hey, Yigit, like what do you think about this? There's this investor that reached out, like, can I get your support? Like, or do you know anyone in Dropbox, like, that we can actually talk to? So there's that like constant communication with some portfolio companies, and with some, there's like some, update basis communication over email. But overall, we like, monthly engagement minimum, so that we are on top of the business and we can be actually supportive for the founder. But in some cases the company moves so fast that like it's okay, like things are going really well, and the best thing that we can do is not to do anything. So in those scenarios, there are also those scenarios, and the philosophy is that like find great people in great markets and just help and support whenever they need. So that's how we think, and how entrepreneurs should think is that it's their investors are their extended team, and whenever there's something that you cannot solve with the in-house resources, just reach out to the investors and they will support.
That sounds like great advice. One thing I tell companies, and I historically have written much earlier stage checks than what you're talking about. So I see a different level of sophistication in the communication. But I often tell people, I like your good news, but I really want to hear your bad news. And I see a lot of real early stage founders have a tendency to gloss over the bad stuff. Not saying they're hiding it intentionally, but they do have a tendency to do that. And to the point where I've even recommended to several, and including myself, I have instituted this before with other investors in my businesses. I'm going to have the good, the bad, and the ugly in every update that I give if I'm giving an email update, because we know there's bad stuff happening and we know there's ugly stuff happening, but those are actionable and can be fixed. So it's an interesting dynamic to see founders and how they communicate with their investors. I do know that you can always tell when they need money by the way they communicate, or when they're getting to the point where they're starting to really think about fundraising.
Really good summary, I think. And problem solving is the thing that I and my partners like to do. So let's talk about the problems, and let's talk about how you can actually move faster. And most of my monthly meetings, I'm always thinking about, like, how can we go faster? I love the speed, but how can we go faster? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you think about interacting with existing investors and companies that you've invested in? I know you like earlier investors, that you like, especially if it was friends and family. And obviously, if you're coming in with other LPs and you're the GP, or if you're an LP and coming in under a GP, that's one interaction. But I'm talking more about, you make the investment, there's 4 or 5 other investors on the cap chart. How do you go about interacting with those investors?
Yeah, a very good question. We think about that a lot, because it's a marriage. It's a long-term marriage, and those are partners, and you gotta have like great partners on board. So there's a bunch of good friends basically in the ecosystem that we work closely. For example, if we find a promising company that we believe in and we complete the due diligence, we share with them and they join us, and vice versa. So over time, like, these relationships have developed, and we invested in similar companies, same companies together, and we enjoyed working together. So we really see, the cap table as an important, aspect in the investment. And the way that we evaluate it and how the founder evaluates it is that which value the new VC, the other VC brings in. Okay, we will help you with that strength that you have. Maybe we'll make it even stronger. But how about this weakness of the company? Like, how can we go to, let's say, the European market, because it's really important? Or how can we go to Japan? Or how can we actually get this expertise, like the partnerships? Do we know anyone in the VC ecosystem that can help with, ISV, partnerships? So those are the things that we think about when we form the cap table with, close VCs within the ecosystem.
So I'm curious, not specific deals, but are there deals you've passed on that you wish you had participated in later?
Yeah. Yeah, we have been doing that analysis. So there are some for sure. Yeah, like, I'm thinking, which one? For example, the one that we looked into before was, a company called Privacera, which I think they are working on a really important problem of, data governance. And we thought that it was too early when we engaged, and now they are doing really well.
Now it's too late for you.
Now it's too late, and I'm very happy for them. I think there's a lot, there's a bunch of companies like that, and there's also like companies that we engaged, and there's of course competition. There has been some companies that we lost, and that's okay. This is like part of the business, but we learn from them, and every engagement is a experience for us. Yeah.
Yeah, and that reinforces your earlier point about play the numbers. You need to have 50 in there because Vela may have liked you and made a mistake. You need to find 3 other Velas who like you and don't make that mistake.
Exactly.
That's great. No, it's funny because I always say, they always say that gamblers never tell you about their losses. I feel like investors never like to talk about the ones that got away.
Yes, and we have some, and you know what, like Bessemer Venture Partners actually released something like that, like where they talk about like their big misses. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, no, it is interesting, and to me, it's a sign of maturity and intelligence to face up to the mistakes that you make, because that's the only way you can improve them and admit where you've failed. I think it's healthy for any kind of business, not just investors.
Exactly.
So we talked a little bit about this already, but do you have any advice for a startup in a second or third tier startup city, like again, like Charlotte or Raleigh or Nashville or Richmond, Virginia, where there there are startups, but there's no real ecosystem and there aren't a bunch of exits and people with all sorts of experience, but there are promising startups and some that do break through. We've got a handful of unicorns here in Charlotte who, in spite of this lack of an ecosystem, still managed to push through the $1 billion boundary. What type of advice do you have for those startup founders?
Yeah, I think overall, like the startup ecosystem is growing. Like when you think about it from a market standpoint, there's no way back. Like all the people that are passionate and driven and innovative, instead of going and working for large companies, they want to go and build, because the barrier to entry and barrier to build a business has really gone down. And now, like when you start a business or a startup, like your family doesn't say, "Oh, why are you starting? Shouldn't you go for a safe job?" Now everyone is like, "Bravo, you are doing a great job." So I think there's a big trend. I'm very, very optimistic about our future overall. And all these ecosystems that we have, it will grow, like organically grow. So this is my long-term view. Now, if we think about like the short term, like what are like the founders that could, do like in Charlotte, and I'm from Izmir, in Turkey. So what are like the founders that in Izmir that can do? So I'm always thinking about those things because it's really important for me and the partnership. So the way that like the founders in other ecosystem should think about is that they have a competitive advantage, right? Like the companies here in the Bay Area or other hubs, the talent very expensive, very expensive.
The
So
rents are very expensive. The rents, the
everything,
food, everything.
everything is really expensive. And for like startups to compete like in other ecosystems, sure they can actually hire some people. They raise money, like it sounds like a lot, but actually they are spending that money for like really expensive stuff. So maybe the 2 million that is raised in San Francisco could be equivalent to, let's say, 500K or 750K. In Turkey, I know that it could be equivalent to 400, 500K. So you can achieve the same with less money, and you can actually retain the talent, because there are not many options to move around, and people here like think about, oh, what's my next step? Oh, there's this hot company, let me move there. So there's a lot of like talent movement, and as a result, like you cannot build the culture and the core team easily. In my opinion, like focusing on the strength is really important, and the strength is like the uh, ability to reach something meaningful from a milestone standpoint with less funding and a great team, great culture. That's what like other startup ecosystems can do really well.
I'm glad you worded it that way. Myself and a few other entrepreneurs or investors here in Charlotte try to talk about that a lot. That, hey, focus on the things that are the advantages that you get from being here. And the reality is, as you said, you guys will invest. So will other Bay Area investors will invest in other cities. And there's a fund called Revolution Capital that was started by Steve Case, and they created a Rise of the Rest fund where they're actively going for investments in second and third and fourth tier cities. And in fact, I had a founder on this podcast about a year ago who raised $20 million led by Rise of the Rest, and he's based out of Raleigh. So I think that it's great to hear somebody from the Bay Area talking about the very same concept that a lot of us like to talk about here, which is, hey, we do have some disadvantages for sure, but there are advantages as well. So,
and there's definitely an appetite, like from the Bay Area or any kind of like the hub investor to invest outside of their hubs, because as I explained, there's a competition, right? Like now finding great companies outside of the hub is important. And just to give you an example, we have a portfolio company in South Korea, and we also have a portfolio company in Turkey. And when we look into the companies, we are like blown away. We are like, wow, how did you guys actually achieve that with that much funding? And you guys are amazing. What?
Yep.
Like,
That's
so I
awesome.
think many people are seeing that, many investors are seeing that, and I'm very bullish and optimistic about that.
So I'm glad you mentioned a couple of international portfolio companies there. I know you had mentioned it briefly before. And what advice do you have for international companies trying to expand to the United States?
Yeah. The key advice is that do not expand early, and there's a lot of there's a lot of companies that want to expand international very early on, typically in the seed stage. I even see that, like I even have like founders thinking about like expanding internationally in the seed stage, which is very early. Like finding the product market fit is really important, finding like the channels that work really important. So my key advice for internationalization expanding is typically like in the Series B stage, Series B financing stage. What that translates into is that, minimum, I mean, this is like, there's no, there are no strict rules about this, but typically what I see is when the company has like $2 to $5 million annual revenues, those are the times that you think about like, did I actually penetrate to the market enough? Like, did I get the market share? Okay. What's going on in the international markets? Am I actually behind? So those are times that you start thinking about, I should just expand internationally more aggressively. And I've seen a lot of companies that achieve that successfully when they were like at a certain stage, like $1 to $5 million. Like those are times that they are thinking about, expanding their market.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to think about, should I put this energy into the international market or should I get this going? And I guess that becomes, do you have a land grab situation where it's just get out there and tackle the winner takes all market? That's really interesting advice. If you were thinking in the other direction, would your answer be any different? So a US company looking to expand to EMEA or to Southeast Asia, would you have different advice or would it be just more of the same?
It would be more of the same. It would be more of the same. But I would say general advice would be for the United States companies to stay in the United States longer. I mean, this is the largest market in the world. So I think going for international could be delayed even more, because if you go to international, then you're actually leaving your home market, which is the most gigantic market on the planet. So I think dominating and just getting the market share in the United States just makes you a large company. So I would delay the internationalization for the US companies even more. But for smaller markets, specifically in Europe, like specifically, countries where, they have different language and limited number of population, they have to think about internationalization from almost day one. And we have few examples that we invested, started really well in their local market, but from day one they were thinking this is not going to be enough. Like we gotta set up the system to be easily localizable, easily internationalizable. US companies don't have to think that much, in my opinion, and that could be delayed.
Wow, that's great advice for sure. How important is exit planning for an early stage company in your mind?
Mm-hmm. Exit planning, I would say less important, almost no importance, as long as the founder has the right motivations, long-term motivations. So if the founder thinks about like exit planning from the beginning, it means it gives a signal that the founder is not super passionate about solving that problem, but thinking about how I can create an opportunistic business and exit that. So that's the reason why I would say that focusing on the problem and being long-term oriented and thinking about basically building an independent company. So
we have this type of question when we talk with the founders, like, what's your long-term motivation? Why did you start this business? And if they talk about an M&A or exit, like this is a scenario where it's not attractive to us, both financially, and from a, time standpoint, right? Like it's we want to work with the founder, hopefully, at least 5 to 10 years. So we want to be in the journey. So the way that like we want to actually, see founders think about how to build an independent company that could actually eventually go for IPO. And what motivates them to build that, business? Because yes, you can have that passion, but maybe your motivations are not right, because there will be a lot of bumps on the way. Yeah.
Very good advice. Thank you for that. Are there, I know you focus on AI, but are there industry verticals that you like to target?
Yeah, overall, we like to be more horizontal. Like when we make the investments, we typically focus on, solutions that can be applicable for multiple different verticals. So as a result of that, like unlike other, VCs where they have like fintech focus or like healthcare focus, we rather have that like generalist, horizontal approach into the companies that we invest. And most of them are, to give you an example, more workflow tools, developer tools, and those are like pretty, widespread across verticals, and productivity tools as well. So as a result of that, we don't have like a specific industry focus.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear your perspective on that, because I think that horizontal platforms or tools are the ones that can get to hyperscale. I do think though that I like to have industry solutions as kind of the tip of the spear. So here's a workflow tool. Here's a specific problem that banks are solving. Here's one that government agencies in the US are solving. Here's one that logistics companies or e-commerce companies. But I view it as a kind of tip of the spear, and you back up the Brinks truck when you come in with the horizontal solution. And it's just it's typically a little bit easier for people to buy solutions that are kind of tailored to an industry. But I'm with you. The ones that are really going to grow the most and solve the most problems are horizontal.
Yes, they of course they have like, the opportunity is much bigger. But at the same time, the challenge there is that like, where do you start it from? Like, it is easily to get distracted and get spread too thin and not solve the real problems of a certain industry. So we always have this question with, the portfolio CEOs that like, are we, starting with the right, solution set for this horizontal technology that you guys build? So it's a common practice and basically thinking that we do with the entrepreneurs.
So I know you're focused on AI and machine learning, and that's probably the high level category that seems to most excite you. Are there trends within artificial intelligence or other technology that have really caught your attention recently that you think over the 2 to 5 to 10 year time span are going to be real game changers?
Yeah, we have sub-thesis among, within AI, and they're again like technology-enabled sub-thesis that we have. The one that we have been really focused on has been computer vision. Because it really, it surpassed human capability of seeing. So there's a lot of different use cases that people solve with, cheap cameras out there. So this has been like a, key sub-thesis that we had. The other sub-thesis that we had was to taking the self-driving technology and applying it to very limited, environments and use cases. The technology is called reinforcement learning coupled with computer vision. So that's like the second area that we get really excited about. The third and more emerging one and very recent one is, I will call it, NLP, which everyone is familiar. There has been a big hype before, like 3 to 4 years ago. We did not invest at that time because we thought that the technology was not working properly. Now it's working. Now it's pretty impressive. Maybe some of your listeners heard about the transformer technology and the recent model that OpenAI released, GPT-3, and there has been previous models, GPT-2, GPT-1, and BERT, which is another model for NLP. It is really crazy. So the technology is ready, and I think there's a lot of very interesting, applications that will be developed on top of that tech. So I think it is very similar to 2016 times for computer vision. Now it is similar for NLP, and that comparably, when you look into the computer vision companies, they have been very successful. Now it is time for that, like NLP driven companies out there.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing all three of those. So I'm going to let you go here in a second because we're coming up on an hour and a half here. But how has COVID impacted your investment philosophy? Is there any impact there, or?
Yeah. So the investment philosophy that we had before was we have been always focused on one of our checklist is recession proof. And that's why we have been also very, careful about not to invest vertically, because some verticals are highly impacted by recession. So that's one of the reasons why we always go horizontal, so that the company can move any direction. So with that recession-proof checklist that we have and the companies that we invested, fortunately, those companies in our portfolio even, grew faster. And there's a reason for that. And the philosophy behind after COVID-19, what impacted is that the things that we expected to happen in 5 to 10 years is happening now. Mm-hmm. Meaning working from home, going more digital, it just crazily accelerated that. So with that, I think there will be more and more innovation, more UX innovation on the digital products. Digital products serve more late adopters. So we are looking for companies that are building software that for industries that are like, I would call laggards or late adopters, or users that are laggards or late adopter segment. So that's one thing that we are heavily focused on and looking into. Just to give an analogical standpoint, most of the innovative tools are built for early adopters, say engineers and designers, right? Like working remotely. But how about
about school teacher, elementary school teacher?
Exactly. So
those are normally not even the mainstream. Those are the laggard adopters, and it's now been forced on them. It's really, really interesting to see, for sure.
Exactly. And the second one is like the traceability and no-touch experience. So we think that there will be a lot of like robotics companies that will come up. So there will be like more automation in every aspect of life, where it brings like robots and machines to our lives even more, because there will be like more regulatory changes on the government side that will force businesses to rethink their practices about bringing, say, healthy food, or how they brought, the ingredients for the food, and bringing the transparency to the consumers and building trust that this is healthy. So it is very similar to how financial crisis changed banks and fintech, occurred. Or when you think about 9/11, security has become very different, and now how we fly changed after that, right? So I believe there will be significant changes about traceability and no-touch experiences in the near future.
I couldn't agree more. We made an investment in a unattended retail platform out of San Francisco, actually, and we just feel like COVID has accelerated that. Now, in their case, there's a headwind and a tailwind because they're operating unattended retail locations inside of airports. And so when less people are coming to airports, you might lose a little bit of business on that side, but certainly retailers who are thinking about Amazon Locker, like no touch experiences, they're not going to use an Amazon Locker because that's a competitor. And so we felt like this business, there were more positives coming out of COVID than negatives. And if we vaccinated and got rid of this virus tomorrow, I don't think those trends are going to reverse at all.
I think so too. People now got that taste of being more efficient. So it will be hard for some sectors to go back. Hopefully, like there'll be more investment in biomedicine and other healthcare areas where we don't actually have this issue again in the future, which is like worrying. And it is very upsetting what is happening right now in the world. And I hope like more and more capital and resources go towards, how we can actually avoid this in the future, and why this happened, and why didn't like the technology haven't solved it yet, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I think many people will think about this, and it will be a great, addition, and there will be great like innovation coming out from that, so that we will not suffer this again.
Well, and I think AI and machine learning have a big part to play in that, because to me, the biggest frustration is just the lack of quality data. And some of it, you're hearing people on both sides scoring political points, and there's a lot of noise. But I think even when you get fundamentally to what's actually happening scientifically, there's just a great lack of data for a variety of reasons. And so hopefully we build more resilient supply chains for testing. Hopefully we build better data centers or cloud technologies that can process that data, because some of these are things that only machine learning can solve, but it can only solve it if we've got a big enough data set. So I'm very hopeful that we don't just get through this and say, okay, let's wait another 100 years until the next one comes and instead invest in the testing and how do we manage all of this data so that people can respond better.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Exactly. The other point that I like that you made is just the recession proof. I've been talking a lot on this podcast about anti-fragility. It was Nassim Nicholas Taleb's latest book, and it was amazing. It's just amazing. I've been able to interview founders of companies who built anti-fragile companies and actually improved dramatically when the pandemic hit. And then you see others that are very fragile and just fall apart instantly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. By the way, I love that book too. There's some inspiration from there as well.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fascinating. Thank you again. You're the first real VC that we've had on the program. You're right in the epicenter of the VC world there, and the time with Google. That I think your story is fascinating and inspiring for a lot of the listeners. So I do thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. This was a lot of fun. And for your listeners, I'm always, up for a chat. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm a friendly guy and would love to talk about like any innovation that you guys are building.
He's not lying, folks. I've never seen anybody who with his smile, and that's always smiling when I've talked to him. So please do reach out to him, and I'll put your website and your LinkedIn and any other social media resources that I can find in the show notes so that people can reach out to you.
Perfect, John. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks. Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Cheers.
Cheers.